I'm giving you a chance.
I got on stage when I was about 5 years.
Have you ever heard Toby Keith's record of I'll Never Smoke Weed with Willie Again?
Every night after the show, Willie Nelson takes off his guitar and puts on an oxygen mask.
There goes that happy ending.
His lungs can barely keep up, but somehow he still sings.
It's been a long, long time.
The legend who outlived his own breath.
It was his. I'm going to blame him for it anyway. Of course, it had to be a lot of his because...
He's worth $25 million and still lives in a barn.
What are you looking at me for? I ain't got nothing to say.
His tour bus, a rusty pickup. His bedroom, a sleeping bag. This isn't just poverty. It's the price of peace for Willie Nelson. Doctors told Willie Nelson to stop performing years ago.
Keith's record of I'll Never Smoke Weed with...
But he said, if I stop singing, I die. And that's exactly why he's still on stage.
I got on stage when I was about 5 years old.
Even when he can't breathe. Before the legend, there was just a barefoot boy named Willie, born in 1933 in a town so small you could ride through it in 5 minutes and miss it if you blinked. Abbott, Texas, a place of dust, faith, and long silences. His mother left when he was just a baby. His father followed not long after. That left Willie and his sister Bobby in the care of their grandparents, 2 old souls who loved gospel music and hard work more than comfort. They were poor, but not the kind of poor that made you bitter. The kind that taught you how to make something out of nothing. Willie's first guitar was a mail order, model that cost $6. It barely stayed in tune, but it was his world. His grandparents played hymns in church, and he'd sit beside them, his small hands tracing invisible chords in the air, dreaming of sounds bigger than that tiny chapel could hold. School didn't mean much to Willie. The fields, the sky, and the sound of his sister's piano meant more. When he wasn't picking cotton, he was writing songs, little pieces of poetry scribbled on scrap paper, the kind of words that came from loneliness, not fame. He once said, "I didn't write songs to be famous. I wrote them to keep from falling apart." The Great Depression left its mark on everyone, but it shaped Willie into something rare, a man who saw beauty in simplicity and truth in pain. He sold his first song for $50, not because he didn't know its worth, but because he needed gas money and a sandwich. By the time he was a teenager, his voice already carried that unmistakable rasp, a texture that felt like a dirt road under bare feet. He sang in church choirs, school halls, and roadside bars where drunks would yell at him to play something happy. But even then, his songs had weight. They were slow, reflective, too honest for the crowd. Abbott didn't have bright lights or stages. What it had was space, endless, open, quiet space that forced you to listen to your own thoughts. That's where Willie's songwriting began, not in Nashville, but in the solitude of small-town Texas nights, where the stars felt close enough to touch and every wind sounded like a song trying to find its voice. He didn't know it then, but the struggles, the poverty, the loss, the long days under the Texas sun were carving out the very soul that would one day define his music. Willie wasn't just growing up, he was becoming a storyteller, and every scar from those years would one day bleed into his lyrics. When his grandfather died, the man who taught him how to pray and plow, Willie was left with a single thought echoing in his head. "Don't quit, boy. Keep singing." It wasn't advice for a career, it was advice for survival, and that's exactly what he did. The road out of Abbott wasn't paved with dreams, it was paved with dust. And Willie drove straight through it with nothing but a guitar, a notebook, and a hunger he couldn't name. He tried college, lasted a semester, and quit. The classrooms couldn't teach him what he already knew. That music was his only language. In his early 20s, he bounced between odd jobs, radio DJ, Bible salesman, farmhand, and even a door-to-door vacuum seller. But no matter where he went, the guitar went too. He'd sit in smoky bars after his shifts, trading songs for free drinks and applause from strangers who'd forget. his name the next morning. Still, every night his voice grew stronger, more certain. It wasn't fame that called to him, it was the sound of truth. He began writing songs like Crazy, Hello Walls, and Funny How Time Slips Away. Songs that spoke from somewhere, deeper than most dared to go. When Patsy Cline recorded Crazy, Willie's quiet little tune suddenly became one of the biggest hits in the country. For the first time, the world noticed his words, but not yet his voice. He was still the songwriter behind the curtain, the ghost in the room who made other people famous. Record labels told him his voice was too strange, too nasal, too rough. They said he'd never make it as a singer, but he didn't believe in perfect voices. He believed in honest ones. Nashville in the 1960s was a machine, churning out polished hits for polished people. Willie didn't fit. He wore his hair long before it was cool, dressed like a rancher when everyone else wore suits, and sang about heartbreak like he'd lived it twice. He didn't want to be part of the system. He wanted to break it. And then came that one night, a small club in Fort Worth. The room smelled of beer and cigarettes, and the audience was restless. But when Willie stepped up and started singing Nightlife with nothing but his guitar, something shifted. The crowd went silent. His voice cracked and drifted, but it carried something raw, something real. When he finished, a man in the back yelled, "Play it again!" That night, Willie realized something important. He didn't need Nashville's approval. He only needed an audience that still believed in stories. So he packed his truck and left Tennessee, driving home to Texas. He traded the promise of fame for the certainty of freedom. And there, surrounded by wide skies and red dirt, he began building a new kind of sound, one that would later be called outlaw country. It wasn't rebellion for the sake of it. It was rebellion for the truth. For the first time, the spark had caught fire, and Willie Nelson was done waiting for permission to burn. The 1970s didn't just bring a new decade, they brought a revolution. And at its heart was Willie Nelson, the man Nashville once turned away. He came back not with a compromise, but with a cause. His long braids, worn jeans, and beat-up guitar became the symbol of something pure, a return to honesty in music. He wasn't singing at people anymore. He was singing for them. Austin, Texas became his new home and creative sanctuary. There, amid beer-soaked bars and open-air festivals, Willie built a movement. The crowd wasn't made up of polished country fans anymore. It was bikers, hippies, ranchers, and poets. They all stood shoulder to shoulder, drawn together by something timeless, truth in music. Then came Red-Headed Stranger. Recorded on a shoestring budget, many thought it was too strange, too simple, too quiet. But when it hit the airwaves, it exploded. The world suddenly understood what Texas had known all along, that Willie Nelson was more than a country singer. He was a storyteller, a rebel philosopher with a voice that carried dust and soul. The Grammys followed. Gold records lined the walls. His concerts turned into pilgrimages. Fans traveled for miles to see the man who could make them laugh, cry, and dance, all in the same song. Albums like Shotgun Willie, Stardust, and Always on My Mind cemented his legend. His sound crossed borders, his lyrics crossed generations. But fame didn't change Willie. It just found him living the way he always had. He'd play a sold-out show one night, then wake up at dawn to feed the cows on his ranch the next morning. He'd drive his own truck, stop at diners, talk to strangers like old friends. Stardom had never been the dream. Freedom was. Money poured in, millions from tours, records, and movie roles. He could have bought anything, but he didn't. Instead, he built Farm Aid alongside Neil Young and John Mellencamp, a concert series to save struggling American farmers. While others built empires, Willie built hope. By the late 70s and early 80s, he was everywhere, TV, radio, movies. His voice had become the soundtrack of America, the dusty heartbeat of a restless nation. Even presidents quoted his lyrics. But behind the laughter and weed jokes, there was something deeper. Willie had become a bridge between the old country and the new, between rebellion and peace, between fame and faith. On stage under that wide Texas sky, he'd sing Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain, and the crowd would go silent. Thousands of people, but in that moment, it felt like he was singing just to one person, you. This was his golden era. But in Willie Nelson's life, glory never came without a storm on the horizon, and the next one would shake everything he built. For the fans, Willie's life looked like a dream. The ranch, the awards, the sold-out arenas. But behind those gentle smiles and easy jokes was a man balancing too many worlds at once. The price of freedom was catching up. The road, once his home, had become a blur of endless highways and sleepless nights. He'd play 4 cities in a week, barely seeing the sunrise without a microphone waiting for him. Fame had a way of turning peace into noise. He'd laugh with friends after shows, but when the lights dimmed, the silence felt heavier than ever. His personal life was tangled. 4 marriages, countless heartbreaks, children growing up while he was miles away, all the love in the world, but never enough time to show it. He once said, "Music saved me, but it also took me away from everything else." Money wasn't the problem. The truth was, he trusted the wrong people, signed the wrong papers, and let the wrong hands handle his fortune. Taxes, investments, debts, things Willie never cared much about, came back with claws. But worse than the money was the weight of betrayal. The manager who had once called him brother quietly took what he'd built. In private, Willie wasn't angry. He was tired. The same man who wrote songs about forgiveness found himself trying to forgive the world. Nights were longer, his chest felt heavier, and though the crowd still cheered, he felt like he was singing from the bottom of a well. There were whispers, too, about the drinking, the weed, the endless road trips. He called it medicine, a way to keep the fear quiet. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was the price of keeping the music alive. The very thing that made him free was slowly wearing him down. Still, he never stopped writing. He wrote through heartbreak, through exhaustion, through the smoke and the silence. His songs became softer, sadder, wiser. You could hear it in every note. A man reflecting on his own mistakes while forgiving everyone else's. Behind the curtain, Willie was still that same boy from Abbott, chasing truth through pain. But the cost of that truth was starting to show in his eyes. The sparkle was still there, but dimmer, slower. And then came the blow no artist ever forgets. The day he learned the government was coming for everything he owned. The outlaw was about to lose it all. The morning Willie found out, he was on his ranch in Texas, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise. Then came the call that would change everything. The IRS had seized nearly all his assets, claiming he owed over $32 million in unpaid taxes. His houses, recording studio, even his ranch, everything was suddenly on the line. It wasn't greed, it was trust. Trust in people who handled his finances. Trust in the system he never understood. But the government didn't care about intent. They wanted their money, and they wanted it now. News spread fast. Willie Nelson broke, the headlines read. The man who'd sung about freedom now faced losing everything he'd ever built. Reporters camped outside his gates. Strangers whispered about the broke cowboy. But if there's one thing Willie Nelson never learned how to do, it was quit. Instead of hiding, he laughed. "If I owe you $30 million, he told a reporter, "I guess that means you think I'm worth at least that much." It was classic. Willie, humor wrapped around heartbreak. He made a deal with the IRS. He'd pay it back his way. So he recorded an album called The IRS Tapes Who'll Buy My Memories. Every song was stripped bare, just his voice and guitar, the most vulnerable work of his life. Fans bought it in droves, and slowly the debt began to shrink. The people who'd grown up on his music refused to let him fall alone. He sold what he could. He let go of luxury, of comfort, of anything that didn't sing back to him. But he never let go of his guitar. Through all the chaos, he still performed. Even when it hurt to breathe, he'd walk out under those lights and smile like nothing could touch him. But the hits didn't stop there. Friends passed away. Old bandmates drifted apart. And years of road wear caught up with him. His lungs, once strong enough to belt through smoke and whiskey, began to fade. Every inhale felt heavier, every show more draining. Doctors told him to rest. Willie nodded, then played another tour. He couldn't stop. He didn't know how. "Music's what keeps me breathing," he said. And maybe that was truer than anyone realized. By the end of the 90s, the world had changed. Country music had gone slick and commercial, but Willie stayed exactly the same. Quiet, humble, worn, and real. He'd lost millions, friends, and his health, but somehow he still had peace. Because in losing everything, Willie Nelson found something he'd never truly had before: freedom from the noise. When the dust finally settled, Willie Nelson stood in the middle of his Texas ranch with nothing left to lose. And somehow, that's when he became whole again. What fame took from him, simplicity gave back. He stopped chasing charts, stopped worrying about numbers, and went back to where it all began: the earth, the guitar, and the quiet. He turned his ranch into a refuge, not just for himself, but for others. He donated acres of land to build a care center for veterans and cancer patients. He opened his gates to kids who couldn't afford music lessons, giving them guitars, time, and hope. The farm that once almost cost him everything became the place that gave everything back. He began to wake before dawn, not for a show, but to feed the animals. He'd pour black coffee into a chipped mug, pull his coat tight, and step into the stillness of morning. No crowds, no cameras, just him, the wind, and the hum of a life rebuilt. Willie found purpose in the dirt. He started planting organic crops, raising animals, and using every bit of income from the land to fund environmental causes. When people asked him why, he'd smile and say, "I just figured it was time to give back to the earth that's kept me alive this long." He didn't rebuild his empire, he redefined it. His days were filled with songwriting and slow living. He'd write by the fireplace, guitar in hand, his old dog sleeping at his feet. The man who once sang in stadiums now found meaning in singing to the stars above his ranch. When journalists asked how it felt to have lost so much, he'd shrug. "You don't lose when you give. You only lose when you stop loving what you do." In those years, his music changed. The edge was still there, but the pain had turned into wisdom. His voice, older, raspier, softer, carried a sense of peace that only comes after the storm. Songs like Spirit, It Always Will Be, and Ride Me Back Home weren't about rebellion anymore. They were about gratitude. People called him a survivor. Willie said he wasn't surviving. He was simply living slower. The man who once raced from stage to stage now found beauty in every sunrise, every breath, every simple thing fame had once made him forget. And though his body began to fail him, his spirit never did. He once told a friend, "I've had a lot taken from me, but I still wake up in the same sky I was born under. That's enough." From the ashes of bankruptcy and loss, Willie Nelson wasn't reborn as a superstar. He was reborn as something even rarer, a man finally at peace with himself. Willie Nelson is 92 now. His hands tremble, his breath comes slow, but his eyes, those same calm, defiant eyes, still hold that Texas fire. Every time he steps on stage, the crowd knows they might be witnessing something sacred, something final. His body has grown fragile. The man who once played all night now needs oxygen after each show. The tank sits beside him, quiet but constant, like a reminder that even legends are mortal. But when he lifts that old guitar trigger and sings the first few notes, the years disappear. The voice may shake, but the soul doesn't. He's long past chasing success. His albums are gifts now, letters to the people who've walked through life with him, songs about memory, about time, about letting go. Each one feels like a farewell, not sad, but peaceful, like an old cowboy tipping his hat one last time before riding into the dusk. Willie still lives simply. His barn-turned cabin smells of wood smoke and old coffee. The walls are covered in pictures of family, friends, and long-gone bandmates. Outside, a rescued horse grazes near the fence, the same one he saved from slaughter years ago. He says it reminds him that everything, even broken things, can find a second life. He doesn't talk much about death. When asked, he smiles and says, "We're all just passing through. Might as well make the trip worth it." He's made his peace with the idea that time wins in the end. But until that day comes, he keeps showing up to play, to write, to breathe. In a world that moves too fast, Willie Nelson became a symbol of what it means to slow down and live. Not for fame, not for fortune, but for truth. His songs have outlived the trends. His words have outlasted the noise. And even now, when he steps on that stage, the crowd doesn't see an old man fighting for breath. They see a life, unpolished, unbroken, unapologetic. A man who turned pain into poetry, struggle into song, and simplicity into art. When the last note fades, he takes a breath, looks out over the crowd, and smiles. Not because he's saying goodbye, but because he knows he's already said everything that needed to be said, in the only language he ever truly spoke, music. Willie Nelson's story isn't about the end. It's about endurance. The kind that only comes from a heart that never learned how to give up. Willie Nelson is 92 now. His hands tremble, his breath comes slow, but his eyes, those same calm, defiant eyes, still hold that Texas fire. Every time he steps on stage, the crowd knows they might be witnessing something sacred, something final. His body has grown fragile. The man who once played all night now needs oxygen after each show. The tank sits beside him, quiet but constant, like a reminder that even legends are mortal. But when he lifts that old guitar trigger and sings the first few notes, the years disappear. The voice may shake, but the soul doesn't. He's long past chasing success. His albums are gifts now, letters to the people who've walked through life with him, songs about memory, about time, about letting go. Each one feels like a farewell, not sad, but peaceful, like an old cowboy tipping his hat one last time before riding into the dusk. Willie still lives simply. His barn-turned cabin smells of wood smoke and old coffee. The walls are covered in pictures of family, friends, and long-gone bandmates. Outside, a rescued horse grazes near the fence, the same one he saved from slaughter years ago. He says it reminds him that everything, even broken things, can find a second life. He doesn't talk much about death. When asked, he smiles and says, "We're all just passing through. Might as well make the trip worth it." He's made his peace with the idea that time wins in the end. But until that day comes, he keeps showing up to play, to write, to breathe. In a world that moves too fast, Willie Nelson became a symbol of what it means to slow down and live. Not for fame, not for fortune, but for truth. His songs have outlived the trends. His words have outlasted the noise. And even now, when he steps on that stage, the crowd doesn't see an old man fighting for breath. They see a life, unpolished, unbroken, unapologetic. A man who turned pain into poetry, struggle into song, and simplicity into art. When the last note fades, he takes a breath, looks out over the crowd, and smiles. Not because he's saying goodbye, but because he knows he's already said everything that needed to be said, in the only language he ever truly spoke, music. Willie Nelson's story isn't about the end. It's about endurance. The kind that only comes from a heart that never learned how to give up. In the end, Willie Nelson's story isn't about a country singer who made millions or a star who burned for decades. It's about a man who lived exactly the way he sang, honest, raw, and free. He was never polished, never perfect, never pretending. He carried heartbreak like a friend and forgiveness like a prayer. Through every fall, every betrayal, every hard breath, he stayed true to something the world often forgets, that peace isn't found in fame, but in living your truth. No matter how small, no matter how slow. The boy from Abbott, Texas, who once sold songs for $50 and played for burgers, grew into the soul of America's music. He gave his voice to those who felt forgotten and built a legacy not from luxury, but from kindness. His barns became shelters. His land became hope. His words became healing. And though his lungs are weak, his spirit still fills every room he walks into. You can feel it when he sings, that deep, unspoken understanding that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It just has to be lived. If you listen closely to a Willie Nelson song today, you'll hear it, the echo of dirt roads, the laughter of old friends, the stillness of dawn before the first chord. You'll hear the sound of a man who never let time or loss take away his joy. One day the stage will fall silent, the guitar will rest, and the last chord will fade into the Texas wind. But somewhere a kid will pick up an old guitar, strum a rough tune, and sing a truth only they can feel. And in that moment, Willie lives again, because legends don't die when their bodies fade. They live in the songs that refuse to be forgotten. In the end, it wasn't money, fame, or comfort that defined Willie Nelson. It was something far simpler: the courage to live, to lose, to love, and to keep singing, even when the breath runs out. Fade out. The road stretches on. The cowboy rides again. Thanks for watching.